Excuse me, Mrs. Helmer.
Oh, what do you want?
Beg your pardon, the front door was left ajar. Someone must have forgotten to shut it.
My husband's not at home, Mr. Krogstad.
I know.
Well, what do you want here then?
A word with you.
You want to speak with me?
Yes.
Today, but it's not the first of the month yet.
No, it is Christmas Eve. But there's something else. Do you have a moment to spare?
Oh, yes, I suppose so, though.
Good. I was sitting at the cafe down below and I saw your husband cross the street.
Yes?
With a lady.
Well?
Might I be so bold as to inquire, was not that lady a Mrs. Lind?
Yes?
Recently arrived in town?
Yes, today.
She is a good friend of yours, is she not?
Yes, she is, but I don't see.
I used to know her too once.
I know.
Oh, you've discovered that? Yes, I thought you might. Let me ask you a straight question, Mrs. Helmer. Is Mrs. Lind to be employed at the bank?
How dare you presume to cross-examine me, Mr. Krogstad? You, one of my husband's employees, but since you ask, you shall have an answer. Yes, Mrs. Lind is to be employed by the bank, and I arranged it, Mr. Krogstad. Now you know.
I guess right then.
Oh, one has little influence, you know. Just because one's a woman doesn't necessarily mean that. When one is in a humble position, Mr. Krogstad, one should think twice before offending someone
Who has influence?
Precisely.
Listen, Mrs. Helmer, will you find the kindness in you to use your influence on my behalf?
What do you mean?
Will you be so good as to see that I keep my humble little job at the bank?
What do you mean? Who's thinking of removing you from your position?
You don't need to play the innocent with me. I realize it can't be very pleasant for your friend to risk bumping into me. And now I also realize who I have to thank for being hounded out like this.
But I assure you.
Listen, Mrs. Helmer, there's still time, and I'd advise you use your influence to stop it.
But Mr. Krogstad, I have no influence.
Oh? But I thought you just said...
I didn't mean it like that. How on earth could you imagine that I would have any influence over my husband?
Oh, I've known your husband since we were students together. I'd imagine he has his weaknesses like other married men.
If you speak impertinently of my husband, I shall show you the door.
You're a bold woman, Mrs. Helmer.
I'm not afraid of you any longer. Once the new year is in, I'll soon be rid of you.
Listen, Mrs. Helmer. If I'm forced to, I shall fight for my little job at that bank as I would fight for my life.
So it sounds.
It isn't just the money. That's the last thing I care about. There's something else, which you probably know. You know, of course, as everybody else does, that some years ago I committed an indiscretion.
I think I did hear
It
something.
never came into court, but from that moment on, every opening was barred to me. I had to do something, and I don't think I was one of the worst. But my sons are growing up. I want to give up all that. For their sake, I must try to gain what little respectability I can. This job at the bank was my first step in the ladder, but now your husband wants to throw me off that ladder back into the dirt.
But my dear Mr. Krogstad, it simply isn't in my power to help you.
You say that because you don't want to help me, but I have the means to make you. Either you know very little about financial transactions, or you have a very bad memory. So, I'd better enlighten you.
What do you mean?
When your husband was ill, you came to me to borrow £250.
I didn't know anyone else.
I promised to get the money for you.
And you did find it.
I promised to get the money for you in exchange for an IOU, which I drew up. But then I added a few lines naming your father as security for the debt. I added the date blank, and for your father to fill in when he signed the letter. And then I gave it back to you. I gave the IOU back to you. Oh my god. Let me stop.